Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason, and in today's video, we're going to be previewing the 2023 Calgary Stampeders. So starting off with their 2022 season, they went 12-6 last year, losing in the West semifinal to the BC Lions. A very successful regular season once again for Calgary, but for the third straight season dating back to 2019, they lose in the West semifinal. And they're going to be looking to get over that hump going forward, and let's look at the changes they did to do so. In terms of their biggest addition this offseason, honestly, they didn't really bring in too many external players, so it was pretty hard to really choose a huge, impactful addition that they brought in this offseason. But I do think one that will have an impact this season is defensive end James Vaughters, who was with the team for the 2018 Grey Cup Championship, but went down to the NFL for the last couple of years and now has came back, and they're going to be expecting him to fill the shoes of a couple of departed pass rushers in Sean Lemon and Folarin Aromalade that were very productive for them last season. So I'm excited to see what Vaughters does. Hopefully he could really reestablish himself as a very good player in the CFL, because they're going to need it on that defensive line. Now, in terms of their biggest loss, the biggest one from a leadership standpoint, from a franchise standpoint, is obviously quarterback Bo Levi-Mitchell, though there are guys like Sean Lemon and Folarin Aromalade that they lost as well, and Jameer Thurman, a bunch of other guys that they lost this offseason, but Bo Levi-Mitchell, obviously the franchise face for a number of years, two-time Grey Cup champion, two-time MOP with the Stampeders. What a great run they had there together. But at the end of the day, I think it was time to move on and go with Jake Maier. I did support that decision. But honestly, I think that, there is risk to it always when you move on from a proven veteran quarterback. Just look at the Hamilton Tiger Cats last year. I trusted Dane Evans to be the guy, but he kind of crumbled under the face of being that #1 face of the franchise. So I'm excited to see how Maier handles it this year. Not saying what happened to Dane in Hamilton is going to happen to Maier in Calgary, but I think it's worth mentioning that, you don't have that safety net of going back to Bo Levi-Mitchell now that he's in Hamilton. Now, moving on to talk about this roster, which is a very conflicting one for me. For offense, I actually have them ranked as the #1 offense in the CFL this year. I think they're just pretty good across the board, every unit of that offense, with the exception of maybe the wide receiver depth is the only question I would have, but excellent running back. Kadeem Carey is my #1 ranked running back in the CFL going into this season. Jake Maier is actually my #2 ranked quarterback going into this season. So you have a really strong foundation there, but the offensive line also ranks first going into this year. So really the only question is the wide receivers, which I have ranked like 5th or 6th. I would have to double check that. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a very good offense this season. Such a high floor. They're going to be able to run the ball pretty much at will. I think it's the best running team in the CFL. So I think that they're going to lean on that, and that's going to give them so much of an edge most games this season on offense. But on defense is where I have the questions for this team. I actually have them ranked as the 6th best defense in the CFL going into this season, and they certainly weren't the 6th best defense in the CFL last year, but the key pieces that they lost, particularly in the front 7, with Sean Lemon, Folarin Aromalade, their 2 best pass rushers from last year, and then, of course, Jameer Thurman at the middle linebacker position. Such productive players in the front 7. I wonder how they're going to be able to replace those guys. I doubt that they're going to be able to match the level that those guys put out last year in terms of production, but at the end of the day, I think that they could probably make a pretty good defense out of this if those guys that they brought in step up, like Vaughters, like I mentioned before. I think the secondary is pretty okay for them. They got a mixture of CFL veterans and a couple of younger guys that they have been working in the last couple of years. It was a very young secondary a couple of years ago, but they've been trying to, get a lot more younger players incorporated into the defensive back room. So I'm very interested to see how the Calgary Stampeders defense shakes out this season, but I do have some concerns about it. Now, speaking about their Canadian talent, I have it ranked as the 7th best team in the league in terms of Canadian talent, and it's definitely not because of the offensive line. I think the offensive line starters for them that are Canadian are excellent. Obviously, Sean McEwen, Ryan Sevier is one of the most underrated guards in the entire league. Zach Williams as well really stepped up into a big role last year. I think there's a lack of depth behind them, which kind of hurts their ranking here on the offensive line, but I think those starters are very solid. I think that you have some promising players there on the defensive side with Isaac and Demi Berglund. There's not too many good players on the defensive back room, at least emerging anyway, that are Canadian, so that's a concern for me, but I don't think they're really going to start a Canadian at defensive back. And then Cameron Judge is really their star Canadian player on this roster right now at the linebacker position. But I think the main concern and why it ranks 7th is the injury to Jalen Philpott, their first-round pick from last year. A really promising young receiver. And I think that besides him, they have a lack of that true good Canadian receiver that you can really count on. Cole Tucker, they selected in the first round this year, could play a big role, but we have yet to see that, obviously. Luther Akunavanu is a guy that has shown some very high highs, but some pretty low lows in the CFL so far. Really disappears at times. So I have concerns about the Canadian aspect of that wide receiving core in Calgary, and that's why, combined with the offensive line depth, I think that's why it ranks at number 7 for me in terms of Canadian talent. Now talking about the strengths and weaknesses of this roster, and this is how the team is going to win games this year, and this is how this team is going to lose games this year, at least in my opinion. In terms of strengths, the running game you have to start with. Just such a dominant running team the last couple of years. They've just been able to rely upon that a lot, and that's kind of a rarity a little bit in today's CFL. There's not too many teams right now that can really say they can rely on the running game on an every game basis, but Calgary is certainly one of them. That offensive line up front, such a veteran group, great tackles. Derek Dennis is an ass kicker at the left tackle position, just a road grader. Kadeem Carey's just a crazy talented running back, probably the best running back in the CFL, like I mentioned before. So that is something they're definitely going to lean on this year. I think they'll also lean on their coaching, particularly on the offensive side. Dave Dickenson, criticized for his moves as a general manager this offseason, but at the end of the day, I think that he is still an excellent coach on the field, and he's going to get the best out of that offense. The only question I have about that is if Dickenson can get enough out of those receivers that are supporting players of this offense outside of Malik Henry and Reggie Bagleton, but I do have faith in Dickenson going forward as one of the best coaches, especially offensively in the CFL. Now, in terms of their weaknesses, I think the pass rush could really lack this year with all that turnover they had in the front 7. Obviously I went over the players that they missed before, but I think that those players were true impact players and they're going to miss them. And I think the wide receiver depth, like I was just mentioning before, a couple of really young players, Cole Tucker, like I just mentioned, but also some American players like Trey Odoms-Dukes, they're counting on to fulfill a bigger role this season. So we'll see how those guys step up, but for now, it's a concern for me. Now moving on to talk about their 2023 schedule, the first 6 weeks of it, that is. So week 1, they're actually in the opening game Thursday night against BC at home. Should be a very interesting game. Those two played some great games last year, so I'm excited for that matchup. And then week 2, they're on the road against Ottawa, a team that most teams in the CFL have beaten up on recently, including Calgary. So we'll see if they can get a win there. And then week 3, they're home against Saskatchewan. So 2 West Division home games in the first 3 weeks for Calgary. Then week 4, they're on a bye. Week 5, 2 really big games coming out of their bye. Week 5 at Winnipeg, and then week 6 at Saskatchewan. So we're going to learn a lot about this Calgary team early in the season because of those in-division games. So I'm excited to see how that plays out for them this season. Now, in terms of my general expectations for this team this year, I'm not going to be like one of those people that predicts that this team is going to fall off every year because, honestly, we've been waiting for that to happen. It just hasn't happened. Maybe it's different this year now that Bo Levi Mitchell is out of there, but they've had different quarterbacks before. I've been watching this Calgary Stampeders team for a long time, so I've seen them succeed with multiple different quarterbacks, including Kevin Glenn and, Henry Burris, obviously, back in the day. So, honestly, I don't really have too many concerns with Calgary in terms of being a good team this year. I have them finishing between 10 and 14 wins. Maybe it's on the lower end this year. Maybe 10 wins is where they end up, but I definitely think they're an above .500 football team, a team that has a couple of really noteworthy strengths. I think controlling the line of scrimmage on the offensive line is going to be a big advantage for any CFL team. If you have the best offensive line in football, I think that you have a great chance of succeeding. It's really hard to be a bad football team. So honestly, I think it's going to be a pretty good year for Calgary, but my only question is, where is the ceiling? Is this a team that's capable of going into Winnipeg or, getting the first seed in the West and beating Winnipeg in a playoff game and getting to the Grey Cup? That's been the hump they're trying to get over, but we'll see if they can do that this season. And with that said, that is going to be the end of today's video, and I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. Once again, my name is Jason. If you want to support this channel, be sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate all the support on the videos this year. And with that said, you guys will have to let me know what you think of the 2023 Calgary Stampeders down in the comment section. And with that said, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.